Greenfeld.
And this is going to be a preview of the talk that we're giving at DjangoCon Europe. It's called Round Pegs and Square Holes, Django and MongoDB. And this is kind of like our practice run doing it, so please be gentle and please hold off on comments and questions till the end, because we're going to try to get our timing right.
So I'm Daniel Greenfeld.
I'm Audrey. And so we're both principals at Cartwheel Web. It's a Python and Django consulting company.
And we also teach Python and Django and other classes at Cartwheel Academy. You can see the link up there in the second bullet.
And we're co-founders of Consumer.io, which is our startup project thing that we've been working hard on. It's kind of like Yelp, but for products, reviewing products instead of services.
Yeah, and we met at PyCon a couple of years back, and now we're engaged. And so so the Python community is awesome.
And you're getting married at PyCon, right?
Our engagement party may happen at PyCon. So, all right. So, what is MongoDB? For those of you who don't know, or at least want to hear our opinion of it, it's a NoSQL data store. It's got all those handy buzzwords there that people live off of, and it's schemaless, which is pretty important in a lot of ways from the development point of view and also from the sysadmin point of view. It's document based. That means that rather than store records with defined attributes per row, it stores everything in something that looks like JSON, or BSON, which is similar to JSON. And with that, it uses JavaScript internally for scripting and querying. It has bindings for everything, and like Django and Python, it's got a huge community behind it.
And just a quick analogy about MongoDB to SQL. In a normal SQL database, you have tables. In MongoDB, they are what they call them, their equivalent collections. And then as SQL records or rows, the MongoDB equivalent is documents, which you'll see in a moment.
And when you query Mongo, you get back data, which I guess is the point of the database. But when you get the information as it's served up by the native, by the Python binding for Pymongo, what you get is functionally a list of dictionaries. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's a generator that allows you to iterate over things really nicely and does all that lazy loading. But from a development point of view, the minimalist view is it's a list of dictionaries. And you can see here in this example that, I hope you can see it, we have a collection, which is a list. There's a document there which has object ID, which is like its primary key. And then I've got my username, my fiance. But I could replace Audrey R, which is her Twitter name, with a dictionary that has lists and more dictionaries in it. So this is not, a document is not a record, it's something else. And as you can see underneath it, there is, you can see how it fits into the whole list paradigm.
Now, since this talk is going to be at DjangoCon Europe, I thought we'd give you a little bit of background about Django. It's a Python web framework. It's one of the most popular ones in Python, and it is its killer feature is just being full stack out of the box, having an ORM admin, forms, and a ton of other things. Now, the full stack thing can be both a benefit and a drawback, depending how you see it. But there is a huge community. There's tons of packages, and people, lots of companies have been tackling the scaling problem and presenting at PyCons and DjangoCons about it.
So when you actually make Django work with MongoDB, it can be a little bit tricky because Django was built around SQL. Postgres, MySQL, SQLite. These things plug really well into Django. The forms, the admin, it's awesome. When you start bringing in something like MongoDB, you lose some of that, hence the title of the talk, Round Pegs and Square Holes. But there's advantages to using Mongo.
So you gotta connect the dots somehow, and so now we're gonna go over the different tools available for dealing with MongoDB and Django together. But note that a lot of this is not Django dependent. In fact, most of what we're going to go over is useful whether you're using Pyramid or Flask or Clone even. So
or just regular Python. You don't even have a website to things.
So the first one is Django non-rel, which is Django based. That's the only one. But then there's also Mongo Kit and Django Engine are a couple of object mappers, kind of the equivalent of like an ORM. And the last one is Pymongo, which is more low level. So option one, Django non-rel in conjunction with MongoDB Engine. So Django non-rel is this what they call it a patch to Django. It's actually a fork of Django, and it's a fork that where they change a few of the underlying undocumented bits and add NoSQL support to the Django ORM, and it's designed to work with different kinds of backends. So there's a Google App Engine backend. The MongoDB backend is MongoDB Engine. You can even use the SQL backends. And the pros of it, so you use Django as you normally would. You don't actually make any changes to your code other than in the settings file. And behind the scenes, they're doing all of the mirroring of the ORM functionality. And there's some introspection with this Django toolbox thing that they have. The cons are that whenever you're dealing with a fork of a major project, you have to be a little bit careful because you're relying on the people who created the fork and are maintaining it to maintain parity with Django core. And it's an extremely ambitious project. They've done a heroic effort. They are a little behind. They're still on Django 1.3, and the latest Django is 1.4. And finally, the MultiDB usage is confusing. So it seems kind of black and white. Like you can use either. You can either set it to like Postgres, or you can set it to something like MongoDB Engine, but it's kind of unclear from the docs and from the mailing list how to use it so that you're using Postgres for the auth and then like MongoDB for the reviews app or something else.
Okay, next up is Mongo Kit, and Mongo Kit is actually similar. They did something I was doing already, although I think they came first. I just didn't know about it. Basically, the way it works is you define models in this fashion. A model represents a MongoDB collection. And you can see that it actually uses standard Python types, Unicode, a datetime object, ints. It's kind of nice. It's got this nice, elegant feel. It originally started off as this was the definition for a schema, but now they've relaxed that, and you can get a bit schemaless, which I like. Yeah, you can see they're the expected fields. They're looser about it, and the decorator connects the review to the collection for reviews. So it handles that binding, which is pretty nice. And I like decorators, so it's a plus. Queries are very similar, or well, actually they're identical to how things are done in Pymongo, which means that if they didn't add any magic to it, so you're not getting your stuff interpreted into something that looks like an ORM or something like that. It is as close to being Pymongo as possible. The pros are not much of a schema, and you can go schemaless and have some real fun and get yourself in a lot of trouble. Speed, it's fast. There isn't much under the hood, so Python isn't doing that much. Everything that could be done on MongoDB is done with MongoDB, and the types are nice. They're nice and intuitive. There are some problems with it. You lose out on a lot of the goodness of Django. You don't get the admin, you don't get model forms, that's all gone. There's other subtle things throughout Django that you have to be aware of. And introspection is challenging. You're generally using the shell or rolling your own tools.
Now, option 3, Mongo Engine. It's the second of the object mappers or object document mappers. So this is a code sample, and you'll notice that it is very, very clean. Kind of, yeah, I like my Python nice and clean, and it's just like it looks a lot like Django models, like your standard Django models. How it's very easy to read. And here's an example of a query, and this looks pretty much exactly like the way a query would look when you're using the Django ORM. That it's just, I think it's really nice. So yeah, I found that I can develop super quickly with it. One thing that's nice about using it when you're like if you compare it with just using just the standard Django, and you'll find like whenever you make a model change, you have to do migrations. With this, since the database, the underlying database is schemaless, it's nice for rapid development work, like being able to change schemas and test things out, iron out bugs, and you can. It doesn't rely on Django, but if you want to, if you are using it with Django, you can use it with a tool called Django Manga to get some introspection, and that is a tool that Danny wrote, which is another heroic effort there. And it's it gives you some schema on the Python object side, but of course the database doesn't have schema. And and there's support for some inner document connections, like there's an embedded document field where you can embed documents within documents. There's also a reference field. You probably shouldn't use that too much, but there's some tools for you. Cons. Some feel that it gives you a little too much structure. That if you that you can't go and like create a collection where every document in the collection has a completely different schema. It's not good for that kind of thing. The validation messages can be unclear, and you don't get to use the Django admin when you're using this. You have to use MongoDB is the best thing out there, and you can't use Django's model forms. You can use regular forms and do some of that manually. And here's a screenshot of Danny's Django Manga tool, which shows some of the introspection where you're, you can see it's kind of like the Django admin where you can see the data and be able to edit and delete. He's going to talk about it more later.
Okay, so Pymongo, it is the official binding that is provided for Python to talk to MongoDB, and it's supported by Tengen, which is the company behind MongoDB. Even though it's open source, they're a commercial enterprise. And you can see here I've got, there's no model definitions here. I have two dictionaries that I'm adding in here. The first one called My Data, it's got a title in there. It's got a rating of 3. And because I'm reviewing ice cream, I guess, I don't know. And but it's got a title field in there, and that's my data, that I like ice cream. And then for Audrey, I said that she liked that you like ice cream. But it's instead of title, I have name. And this is important. I can do this. This is not SQL. This is not big table. This is a schemaless document-based data store. So when I do queries, you can see up here I've got the data up on top and the queries I'm going to be doing. Here I'm finding all the reviews with a rating of 3. So it's pretty straightforward, pretty simple. It's like you're writing dictionaries to do your queries. And in the back end, this is being translated into MongoDB's version of JavaScript, which is pretty close to standard JavaScript. In the second one, it's a little bit trickier. I'm looking for only documents with titles in it. So this will only return one result. And in this case, I'm doing a regular expression to look for ice cream. It's a really simple regular expression, but it's a regular expression. So yeah, you've got a powerful query language, and you can look for just things with titles, just things for names. There's all kinds of ors and ins and stuff like that you can do. So with Pymongo, it's really fast. It is meant to be as fast as possible. They're always tweaking and tuning it. Every once in a while they have a glitch, but it's really fast. You can go crazy with your schemas. You can have 1 million records, each one of them with only the ID field being the same field that is constant across all 1 million documents within a collection. So you can get there's some really interesting applications in chemistry and science and all kinds of stuff, making forms for LegalZoom. It's supported by the vendor, and in fact they say it's the best way, or it's the recommended way. There are some problems. You're basically working off the shell at this point, or you're using third-party tools. There's some open source ones, there's some expensive ones. When we went around asking, everybody was using expensive ones, so that's a problem kind of right now. It's very low level. You're writing a lot of stuff, if you care about validation, you're writing that yourself. And you lose out on model forms and admin and all that stuff. And there are those who believe that it's not as clean, as elegant, as fast as developing as with an object mapper, and they would be correct.
So, a summary, you got Django non-rel, which is a fork of Django.
And Mongo Kit, which is like Pymongo with some structure and a foundation to work off of.
And Django Engine, which is very similar to Django models, but with a schemaless database background.
And Pymongo, which is kind of like playing an assembly, but with vendor support. So, okay. We're going to go into what we actually think, not just a description, or more into what we think. One of the things that's a real problem is, if you notice with a lot of these things, like, oh, we lose out on the admin, we lose out on the forms. In fact, there's over 1,200 packages on Django packages, which are for Django, and maybe 5% of them will work with Mongo, and those don't even talk that well together. And that's kind of a shame, considering the popularity and amount of usage of MongoDB, especially once you step out of the Python world. So what we would like to see, and we've been talking to some other engineers about it, is a third-party app for Django. Not a whole fork of Django, but something which would serve as a bridge. So that way you could use auth with the rest of Django, and it wouldn't be painful like it is right now, where everybody has their own different patterns. And it's great to have different patterns, but it makes it harder to share code. The other thing I have is I think I made it clear through the talk that I refer like Pymongo and Mongo Kit. I've wondered why people like to attach heavy schemas to a schemaless system when I can use Postgres and various migration tools and use high-level caching tools and get the same kind of performance, but with back-end type checking and all that pesky stuff that in theory MongoDB lets you get away with, but in practice with the schema database you might think about. I mean, Audrey's going to go into a little bit of that as well. Her thoughts on it. And then I have this idea for an introspection tool. Django MongoNut is awesome, but the problem is it works with Mongo Engine because Mongo Engine provides a structure for it to work off of. But the problem is it doesn't work with Mongo Kit. It doesn't work with just plain Pymongo. If I want to look at a Rails app or a PHP app that's using MongoDB, I can't do it. And so what about if we had I mean, Python's a dynamic language. We should be able to, or maybe I should be able to, come up with something that does immediate introspection, looks at a record, and it displays the data for that record and creates forms for that. This isn't impossible. This is very doable.
So, so my thoughts on all this. Well, so I tried to get back to why would you use a schemaless database? And the big promise that you see all the schemaless databases offering is performance advantages, and particularly when you have a distributed system, it's very hard for it gets complex to keep a distributed system relational and have it still be ACID compliant, and so you have a trade-off where MongoDB is not ACID compliant, but if you have a use case where you really need the performance and you're really willing to sacrifice that, you can use it. For most cases, I think this is more something that you try if you need, but for most, generally you don't use it. And I think that sometimes the term schemaless database is a euphemism for ACID non-compliant database. So, but it's okay to have an ACID non-compliant database. Like I said, if you are okay with having to deal with the very small risk that you try to retrieve the data and it hasn't fully been updated yet. And also want to make the distinction between having schemaless Python models and schemaless MongoDB collections. So I think that so there's kind of this confusion with the term schemaless, and it's important to realize that in most use cases you have your models. You're going to have, say, like a table or a collection where all the data kind of has the same fields and follows the same patterns. And I think that generally you want to use. Generally, it's just more efficient and to develop with something like Mongo Engine. But there's, I came up with this thing, Schema Anarchy, which is when you have a collection and all of the data in the collection is completely different from each other. So.
Okay, so going forward, what's to be done? I guess using Django with MongoDB, it's the round peg in the square hole. So there's some big hurdles here. Django is really designed. It was really conceived around the idea of create, record, update, and delete using a relational database model. And we're working to fix the solution, but it's a long battle. And introspection tools, we're working on it. I would love to see bridges, the simple bridges that I talked about, nothing complex. As soon as it gets complex is when other developers shy away from it, when they see us go and say, this looks kind of magical, and my data is based off of it. That's generally how things have been done. Very magical code, unbelievably sophisticated code, like pi level code, and I'm not kidding. You can ask me about that after the talk. It would be nice to have a drop-in replacement for Django auth. And Django 1.5, in theory, they're refactoring auth to make it pluggable or drop-inable or something like that. And hopefully I'm going to be talking with some people at EuroDjangoCon, or DjangoCon Europe. And then, of course, there's no best practices. There's no standards. Everybody does it their own way. It'd be nice to see guidelines and, yeah, just suggestions. And there's nothing like that provided by Tengen or the rest of the MongoDB community. So I've got some works in progress that are kind of playing around with this. There's Django Manga, which has been mentioned several times so far. And I want to improve it. I want to make it independent from Mongo Engine so it can be used on any any Mongo store, it'd be a really powerful tool. People would just roll out Django plus Django Manga not to look at their Rails app or their Pyramid app. And so part of it, there's also having graphing tools. I'm going to show that to you next one here, this slide here. So I've added this graph to the right where, let's say we have a message which has an embedded field of a user as well as profile and history, and these might be dictionaries or lists. And this would be a clickable SVG. If you're an IE user, well, I'm sorry, we probably can't. I don't know if IE10 does SVGs with links in it yet, but
I don't think anyone cares.
yeah. So just this, the thing is, well, people do care. It's still 30% of the world, right, or something like that.
No developers.
No developers, he said. The nice thing about the graph is trying to model this information in HTML, you end up with what looks like a table of contents, and that doesn't work as well, because then you assign precedence to the first thing. If the first thing's done alphabetically, that's one way, but we won't necessarily get that data in alphabetical order, so hence a picture says 1,000 words. Django Manga, depending on some conversations I hope to have in a few weeks, we'll find out if we're going to be working on it this summer or waiting until Django 1.5, probably in the autumn. So,
well, that's about it. Here's the list of tools that we went over. And if you're interested in any of those tools, you might want to snap a photo or something. Maybe we'll send it out later. And just a quick plug to check out Cartwheel Academy, which is a series of Python and Django courses that we are planning to do and starting July and August.
yeah, these are hard. They're for beginners, but they're challenging.
And lots of homework.
Lots of homework.
I can confirm that they're really mean. Courses are hard, but they beat you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know what? The timer didn't work, but I looked at the time we started. We were at 29 minutes. So
our talk is supposed to be 30 minutes.
yeah. Yeah.
So, I recently had an experience with a bunch of MongoDB sales engineers, which I know you've heard about. Well, one of the questions specifically that came up was people talked about, okay, so you have schema, and you start shoving things into it, and then it turns into your wonderful schema anarchy, right? But so you can't really shove everything into a schema. So when I asked, like, okay, so there's no joins, but what if you have to do reporting or a lot of bulk lookups and whatnot? And the answer was really, oh, well, you have to do MapReduce, which is just like basically like kind of putting it out there in the air and it hangs over you, because like, what does that mean? Do I just deploy Hadoop and learn everything about it? I mean, what tools are there to kind of help out with that?
So
toolkits and whatnot.
So you can actually do what they call references in MongoDB, which is their equivalent of a join. It is not ideal. It is not what MongoDB or CouchDB or any of these things are really optimized for. I mean, you can put indexes on the individual collections, but you don't relate them.
Right.
So we certainly do these references in our work, but we try to keep it to a minimum. MongoDB comes with a MapReduce utility, and so you'd run it inside of MongoDB, or if you wanted to, if you want to pull in Hadoop, you could do that as well, but then and have that read off MongoDB.
I guess what's the I mean, I don't know how good is their solution. I mean, what's the recommended solution?
It kind of depends on the scale and intensity of your data. I mean, if you're doing, it's.
I mean, I think that there's not really any recommendation. They
will recommend for, if you're doing a giant report with lots of information, because those are salespeople, they will say, use MapReduce, the MapReduce functions within MongoDB, and they're good. They're very solid. Some people swear by them. There are those people who have some issues with them, but I know people have issues with Hadoop, so it kind of evens up. Yes, Lars.
Have you guys built any? Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
You guys built any applications where you've used both an ORM and Mongo?
Oh yes, everything that we've done using MongoDB.
So you've never just relied on Mongo by itself?
Have we done? Actually, we did do one. We did do one.
But we like to try and keep the the more Django-y bits in Django, so we like to keep the auth, the profiles, because that we like to do foreign key.
When we've done anything with credit cards, because MongoDB does not have transactions except for what people code in, whereas Postgres, which is our go-to database, certainly has very powerful transactional support. So in those cases, we have Mongo do its stuff, and then for the financial transactions, we use the transactional database.
I like your style.
Thank you.
So the one time you did do, the one time you guys did go all in on Mongo, would you do it that way again, or?
We had no auth or anything for that one, right?
Yeah, we had no auth. It depends on the use case. Do you want to describe the product store? Okay, so we had a product store with consumer.io early on. We decided, well, we're going to serve up every product in the world. And but since the data coming from vendors was all different shapes and sizes, this is how we got into MongoDB. And we're like, okay, we've got data coming in, and then we're pushing data out, and we can't necessarily predict the structure of it. And so that was a pure Mongo application. And
I mean, I remember when we first imported something like, like a few 100,000 product records into there, and then we tried just like doing simple text search, and we're like, whoa, like that was a little faster than expected.
Yeah.
And that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Would you say that if you got, let's say, a medium document in XML, that you could, that from various sources, just say, we got documents from everywhere, they're in all kinds of schemas, some of them don't even have schemas, they're just thrown together, some are exported out of Excel 2012. And would you be able to say, we can put those in, convert them to MongoDB and then query them?
Yeah, that's one of the common use cases, is that it becomes, I remember back in the day, we're going to have XML databases, it's the wave of the future. And it didn't quite work out that way. MongoDB and again, its competitors really fit that use case well, taking in that data and serving it out again at speed. The catch is that MongoDB, a single document within a collection, can be no larger than 16 megabytes. So you get too much data in there, you got to figure out some way. This is where reference fields or the joins come in, and then you get into sophisticated architectures, and it gets sophisticated.
That use case that you mentioned is very similar to what Danny mentioned earlier, of like where you have all these legal contracts, a database of legal contracts. They're all very, very different from each other, so you can't. It's difficult to come up with a model to represent them unless it's like a really vague model, and that's.
Yeah, I work with the loan business, and every single loan is different. And we start with PDFs, and we have people to look at.
I was going to joke and say, when you were naming all your types of data, I was going to say, what, scans of faxes from 1988? But, yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, my question, I guess it's a little political. It's I was interested. I was researching the Django non-rel thing. I did not realize it was a whole fork of Django, and that's what I guess I'm curious about is kind of what you mentioned is like we need something that's kind of dropped in, like a bridge.
Yeah.
And I was curious, I guess the Django core devs, what their opinion is of like MongoDB or any NoSQL stuff, and why they've been kind of overlooked it so far.
I mean, I think that they've been trying. Like there was a Google Summer of Code project. I think this was Alex Gamer's project to try in 2010 to try and look at some of the Django non-rel stuff, and also maybe come up with alternative approach for doing this exactly. And it hasn't gotten merged. And I think it's just a very complicated change, and it's also a change that I mean, I don't understand all of the workings, but from what I get, it seems like it's a change significant enough that it will affect the way a lot of the machinery under the ORM works. It's
taking what's already complex machinery and adding more complexity to handle all these use cases for potentially very different data stores. And a better approach is, and I think our opinion, is instead of having Django.db.models cover every data store under the sun, having maybe at some point in the distant future Django.db.documents or something, and so that way that way they can isolate out that code, because otherwise it stops being atomic. You got tons of if statements or special classes and mass hysteria. But Django non-rel, as you notice, it's a 1.3. It's not 1.31, so it hasn't been security patched. It's 1.3.
I think it might be 1.3.
No, it's specifically 1.3. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
so
it's
there-
interesting because,
yeah.
like, you know, it seems similar to, like,
Yeah.
using Django's forms without the ORM.
And it's interesting because, well, also, like, you look at the Django non-rel site and they talk about how it is, they describe it as a patch, like a very small change to Django. And so I don't
100
really-
lines of code.
Yeah, so I
I've
don't
looked
really
at it, and the
understand.
thing is 100 lines of code, depending on where those 100 lines of code are and what they do, can be really significant. And it certainly has been a heroic effort, but you know, it's maintainers. That's
Well,
that's
the original author, Waldemar, has moved on to other things, and so the person who is maintaining it now is still actively working on it, but it's not. But they they didn't create it. They're not familiar with.
So, I'll put you guys in the spot, but you guys don't have to answer.
Okay.
What about some of the more of the advanced features and kind of read and write contentions, bits that kind of were raised with MongoDB? Do you guys want to talk about any of those at all?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Shoot questions. Do you have?
Well, that's pretty much the question.
Okay.
I think MongoDB takes a lot of heat from the detractors who say, "Oh, there's a global write lock. Who writes a database with a global write lock? It's trash."
So
Yeah.
apparently, I think I read that that's been fixed. I
Well,
don't know.
they
I
have
don't
better
understand.
resolution now.
Yeah.
So yeah, they've
Yeah,
made it
improved.
smaller. But so you mean has that?
Yeah.
Have any of those things that people complain about MongoDB? Have you guys run into those? And
We actually, fortunately, have not run into any issues.
I mean, our
with
use
that.
cases are generally where it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. I mean,
Incorrect
the
data.
thing is you use the right tool for the right job. And part of the problem is, and this is maybe a little bit political, is people listen to the sales pitch, and that doesn't necessarily match what the documentation will say. And a lot of the times when MongoDB is brought into a project, it is not an engineering decision, it's a management decision. Someone saw something in CIO magazine and they make the call. SourceForge is on MongoDB because of management call. And they've worked with it fine. They have nothing but good things to say about it. But that's not an uncommon use case. It's why Rails is chosen for some places, .NET for others. So I think it's when you're doing a high volume of read and writes off the same collection, or you don't it's like, depending on how you structure things, like if you have everything in just a few collections in one giant data store, I mean, sometimes it's good to distribute your data if you're working with huge sets of data. And if you, regardless of what database you're using, but I believe that's kind of a constant. I mean, Google's infrastructure is built around this concept. So I think yeah, you can hit those limits, but if you're aware of them and read the docs, then you can avoid them and mitigate them. So, any other questions? Yes,
How wide have you gone with Mongo? Like how many servers?
How many database servers? With it?
Yeah, because I worked someplace where we used it, and we were just trying it out, and we only had one of them. And what happens is you come up with a query that then just locks the whole thing up, and it's like, well, this query is going to spit out in an hour. Until that happens,
Wow.
we can't touch anything inside this
So,
infernal Mongo thing. So you kind of in production, you're supposed to go wide with the thing. I was just curious how wide you guys have gone with it.
so we actually have been using a MongoDB as a service thing called MongoLab, so that we don't have to touch any of that
We
stuff.
get people who live and breathe MongoDB doing it, and
Yeah.
could we spend the time and become absolute experts on server setup and stuff like that? We could, but I'd rather hire you to do it. There are people who can set this up and do it. There are people who you can call in to teach you how to do it. And
Basically, we heard it was hard and we didn't want to do it. We discovered we could just paint it.
Well,
how
you
to
chose
done.
wisely.
yeah, the common picture painted is, oh, it's easy, just do it. But nothing worth doing at scale or at speed is ever easy. I mean, that's why we're here, because we love that challenge.
I mean, from what I've learned specifically, like some of the constraints deal with writing, which is that global lock. So if you're going to write a lot, and I mean a lot, you pretty much gonna you would block
Right,
a relational
constantly.
database on that too. And then some of the biggest concerns I've seen is the way that the indexing is resolved. They don't actually use an execution plan. They just let things run side by side, and then once either one returns or it hits certain points, it stops. So you can actually kill your server with some of the stuff.
One
as long
of the
as you're
things
aware
that
of
we
that.
do
Yeah.
is, okay, MongoDB is fast. It doesn't have all those pesky constraints like SQL. That doesn't mean that it's not being served up from disk or some loaded in memory, but it's not going to be as fast as Memcached. So what do? We stick the big chunks of data or big result sets in Memcached, and that might be part of it. Is again, it's you have to look past the marketing, and then you find out what it is as a tool, and you're like, wow, this is really nice. This does exactly what we need, and that's I think the sweet spot in every system. So.
I think that's a really good point you made, because a lot of people try and make it like, oh, it's got to do everything that I need it to do in one server. It's like that's not what each server's designed to do. It's like trying to make Apache do store documents.
Yeah, or make Cold Fusion,
It doesn't
make Java serve up websites. I mean, it's
Yeah, I mean the big use case that we got into using it for was a case where we have tons and tons of data, and it's all basically reads. Like we import all the data and then we don't really change very much, or if we change it,
periodic
a little,
changes. Yeah.
So,
Any other questions? Awesome. Thank you.
Like incorporate it into your product, sell it, make $1 million.